And hello, everybody. We're going to be working again and continuing our tiering of presidents of the United States. And we are getting into a much more modern era as we start with John F. Kennedy. And just a few things I'm noticing. My bell curve, and I'm kind of a believer in the idea of normal distribution, might be a little subject to overrating. So it is quite possible that some of these people in the A's are going to find their ways to the B rank and maybe some C's actually into D. Kennedy is going to be one of those ones that I think is on the bubble. He is a very good president. He has some really big positive things to him, but he only is president for a short while. He doesn't finish his first term because he's assassinated, which is a tragedy in many people's opinion and my own. I think that he had some tremendous traits and he did some really good things while he was president. The Cuban Missile Crisis is probably the best example of his leadership in a very dangerous spot, dealing with conflicting interests of his own advisors, between people who wanted to push for a more aggressive and assertive solution. But the fact that he got us into the crisis is also due to his inexperience and some of his foreign policy problems. And he was really outplayed by Khrushchev in the period of, the first couple of years with a couple of situations. And Khrushchev saw his foreign policy skills as being weak, and he did take advantage of them. So a great recovery from a bad situation from a pretty wily opponent. Khrushchev felt that he was indecisive and not sure which way he wanted to go. And again, that's the result of his early on in the presidency and his relative lack of life experience. He was a rather younger president, and he's not like someone who had a long career in politics like an Eisenhower or Truman, who had many years in public service, although he had only been vice president for a short while. But life experience played in. And so Kennedy's inexperience kind of got us in trouble with the Russians, and Khrushchev took advantage of it. He saw Kennedy as being kind of weak in foreign policy. One thing he does is he lowers the tax rate, especially on the capital gains and at the top levels. And ever since that time, the wealth gap has gotten greater when he gave tax cuts to the upper brackets, lowering them from a very high rate. Eisenhower had a rather high rate in the 60-ish% above a certain amount. And this starts the income gap where you start seeing the super rich start getting further and further apart from the upper middle class, the middle class, et cetera. And this is because of his tax cut policy, many people believe, and I think there is some merit in that. So he does lower taxes quite a bit, and the income gap does start from this. He does pave the way for civil rights, and by a lot of work of the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, working with him, he also provides that kind of intangible dealer in hope. He is an amazing speaker, youthful, hopeful, and he again, he did handle his major crisis, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis, well. He opens up the new frontier, really kind of giving the space, the exploration of space, the space race, and really putting it into the idea of this is a new frontier. His Berlin speech again is a classic. Another speech that is the Rice University speech is another tremendous speech. So he really was able to encapsulate um, what he was all about and the way he saw America moving forward very well. A great dealer of hope. Um, he's going to be put in the A pile for now, but he is likely to go. Actually, I'm just going to put him in the B right now because the Cuban Missile Crisis is a mess kind of his own making. And again, it's short. We don't know how it plays out. We don't know how Vietnam would have worked out under his presidency. It might have been the same thing. although he was showing signs that he was somewhat wary of further involvement in Vietnam. We really don't know how it would have panned out when the rubber hit the road after that Cuban Missile Crisis, because many people had seen him as kind of being soft on that and leading to the situation. And so we don't know if he would have done similar things to LBJ. We don't know. So I'm going to leave him as a B. If I wasn't a strict believer that in human events that there's kind of a natural falling out between what is really excellent and what is good. And B, there are not many Bs. He's among some pretty good presidents there. And again, it's possibly likely that another A is going to fall into the B and some Cs are going to fall into D land, because I do think that maybe my background and the idea of, we want to support our president and say, oh, he's a good guy, but some were ineffective or less effective than others. So this might be changing a bit. All right, next up is LBJ, and LBJ is he's a exceptionally mixed legacy. He creates the Great Society, which is wonderful on paper, and his motivations are great. He grew up in Texas. He knew what poverty was like, firsthand. So many of the entitlement programs that are out today, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty, all these get his their start in his presidency. His speech on the Great Society is an amazing speech and should be read, and it's very admirable and laudable, the goals. The problem is it hasn't worked that much. You can argue and make some pretty good arguments that all these programs have not really helped that much, and that's not saying it without quality. And we don't know what things would be like if they had not been employed. Obviously, there is a severe situation in the gap between those who are poor and those who are not. And we just addressed this early, and there are many factors that are involved in that. But again, the war on poverty hasn't really worked that much. If you look at the data, it's actually worse. But then again, we don't know how much worse it might be had these programs not be put in place. And some of them, I think, a Medicare expansion is something that is a common topic today. And many people believe it should be expanded in the form of all Americans eventually put on Medicare or Medicaid. All right. Civil Rights Act is an amazing piece of legislation, and it does provide a great amount of equity and balancing the scales and opportunity for all Americans. The Voting Rights Act is another one. Under the Voting Rights Act, you have a lot of change coming in. Another big aspect that he puts in are the Title I laws regarding education. The question again would be, how effective have they been? The intention was to provide equity in education and funding for people who are at risk. And again, they tick many boxes on the construct of social justice and things that we now kind of recognize this as good policy, but the overall impact and effect of them have been marginal. But he got a lot of stuff done. Boy, he really does. The Clean Air Act is done under his administration. Again, civil rights, war on poverty, the social programs. He opens up immigration. He starts the country moving towards détente in his tone with the Soviets, and I think that was somewhat of a legacy of John F. Kennedy. The big problem is Vietnam, and Vietnam is a major problem. This is a war that we are put into a situation that he expands the war greatly. We get a point that we have 1 million troops in Vietnam, and the disparity of the casualties, when you look at social class, race, and other factors, are truly startling. When you look at the average age of the participants, and again, who was going into Vietnam, and the fact that we didn't recognize that the Vietnamese were very dedicated to this process. They wanted independence. This starts as a war of independence with, yes, left of center economics policies, but there's really an anti-imperialism war when it's against the French, and the United States takes on the mantle of imperialism. And you can certainly make arguments that that was not the kind of thing that we want to be when we're talking about that we're a democratic society dedicated to civil rights. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is another example where, it expanded situations. There's a lot of faulty intelligence in there, and later on you have in the time frame of transition, the Pueblo incident, there was definitely a march of war hawks toward direct military engagement in Asia, trying to win it over. And if you look at the end result of this, Vietnam today is, yeah, they have some communist ideas and stuff like that, and their economy is different, but they're partners in trade, and relationships have become normalized. So the idea of the necessity of the Vietnam War, the was it a good idea, and the cost of the Vietnam War, not only to the killed in action and wounded in action, but to the budget and to the construct of how America is viewed around the world. He has a willingness to change from when he was a senator to being president. When he was a senator, he was much more parochial, more concerned with Southern issues, and that showed in a lot of his voting records in the Senate. And he takes on a more national point of view, what's good for the nation, and less of a parochial one, which is a nice shift. Now, a lot of people would have him as an A, a lot of people would have him as a B, a lot of people would have him as a C, and some would have him as a D. I'm going to say his legacy, he is a very important president because of the legislation that's passed, and that's good. Vietnam is a big negative and what it did to this country. So I'm going to give him a C, and I think he'll stay there. I don't believe he's a D president, but I do not believe he should be higher than a C because Vietnam is a big, big weight. All right, let's go now to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is obviously a president who likely would have been impeached had he stayed in office. So he resigns under a cloud of controversy. And this is another exceptionally busy president with some ideas that, are very progressive. He is not this hard right economic conservative. He's very progressive in his social policies, although some he's also very conservative on. To wit, the war on drugs really gets its start under him. He adopts the Southern strategy, which you can, make the argument that he is looking on the racial tensions of the country and trying to use fear tactics to bring the South, that had been very Democratic, into the Republican fold. It works. He wins the election in '68. It's a close election, very much torn apart by the internal problems of the Democratic Party. The second term is a landslide, but then you have Watergate. So let's look at some of the things that he does that are the negatives. Watergate is one of them. This is a break-in by people into the Democratic National Headquarters in an election that Nixon wins not by a landslide, but by an avalanche. I mean, it's not even close. And candidly, he wasn't willing to throw these people under the bus, which he should have done if it had been more politic just to get rid of them. And he engages in a cover-up, which is the problem. He was very paranoid and worried how it would perceive him. And probably the best thing would have done is, yes, this happened, and these are the people responsible, and brought them to quick heel. He doesn't. It involves a cover-up, and then you start going down that road where you have all the secret tapes and stuff like that. So it's a big mistake. The scandal itself is stuff that had gone on before. I believe the LBJ had done something similar to the '64 campaign with Goldwater. So this is the kind of thing that does happen in politics. There's spying going on, but he didn't throw him under the bus. One of the problems with Nixon is he's just he's very defensive. And it might be his personality type, but he doesn't react well at all to criticism. And one thing that does happen with him is he has this weird policies in Vietnam where he's kind of secretive, and this involves Laos and Cambodia and an expansion of the war that was kind of working against his idea that he wanted to get out of this war. Peace with honor was his standard and his saying. He knew that Vietnam was tearing the country apart. Now, in fairness, the Viet Cong and the Army of Vietnam, North Vietnam, they were using Cambodia as a staging area and launching a lot of attacks through Cambodia. So and he looked at this as a military solution to the problem. This, again, isn't the mess of Vietnam. This was just an absolute mess that probably didn't do much for United States standing or anything else. Well, so you have the expansion of the war into Laos and Cambodia with bombing and stuff, etc. But as overall, he definitely de-escalates the war, and the Americans do withdraw, which doesn't make everyone happy. We withdraw from the war, we leave, and there's a peace treaty signed, and then it's broken very shortly after. Again, Vietnam, the people, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, they wanted a unified Vietnam, and they were communist at the time, and Vietnam's going to go through a lot of suffering after the fall of Vietnam, which falls rapidly after the United States leaves. Again, the war on drugs is his legacy, and this is something that, looking at this being a war, and it really becomes as much a war on the citizens who are in the drug culture rather than just the concept of a war on drugs. Um, we have a different view, I think, in our society, although it's constantly shifting, a much more libertarian view towards drug use, with some states, legalizing marijuana, et cetera, for various reasons. But there are also negative results that come from them. To wit, Colorado was one of the first ones, I think, to legalize drugs even on a recreational basis. And if you look at their high school graduation rate and number of complications coming from this use, and of course of the strength of the marijuana today, it has led to some unanticipated problems, or problems that should have been anticipated. But the war on drugs basically has racial components to it. It has socioeconomic components to it. And overall, it it has not done as much as people would want, policing it on a street level rather than looking at more where who are the providers of these things. This was, again, rallying people who were looking, go to the kind of the real state of the nation. It's very disorganized, a lot of disharmony, and it's epitomized by, partially by the Democratic convention. And that's that convention, and seeing people react the way they did, and again, just as someone looking back on it in time, it scared the heck out of John Q. Public, especially people who were more traditional and conservative. And he takes advantage of that, and he throws the war on drugs. However, let's go back to the other side. SALT I is signed under his time, and he really starts the warming of the Cold War, and that's a major historical development, that we're no longer going to use brinkmanship at all. This has been an evolution. Kind of started with Kennedy a little bit, where he negotiated missiles in Turkey for missiles in Cuba, continued to an extent by Johnson, and really brought more forward by Nixon. He also visits China and visits the Soviet Union. These are big deals in warming up the Cold War. So SALT I, warming up the Cold War. A very controversial thing that he does is inflation is really ripping apart the nation. And he put a price freeze where prices were frozen, set in place. And obviously this is a pretty big move. And what it does is it does stop the inflation. And inflation, again, is because what it does, it's like a boll weevil. It just eats away at your savings and your life savings that you're doing, trying to get by for day-to-day living. So this is it was a controversial move, but he does make the move. He also expands the funding of Social Security. And this is, again, he's taking a New Deal policy, and he's embracing it, taking it as his own, saying we need to expand it because of different situations that are happening in our country that are different in the late 1960s than it was in the 1930s, when the legislation was funded. He proposes a universal health care. Again, he has done this 3 times. He does it in 1947, does it in the 60s, and does it again in 1972. It's called the CHIP program, which is basically kind of like an HMO plan for those people who cannot get any kind of insurance. It's an expansion of Medicaid, but it strengthens it. It's also going to strengthen employers who fund healthcare plans for the workers. For better or for worse, Watergate kills this plan. He's running for his political life after Watergate. But it is probably that legislation. He was a pretty popular president. He had a pretty big mandate after the 72 election. So this guy's mixed. I mean, he's all over the place. I think he's very paranoid. You can make that argument, and a lot do. He does things that are certainly on the foul side of doing things, on the foul ball side of doing things as a president. But look at his legislation and some things that are very important. I think that the change in the Cold War that we're going to see in the 1980s is big part from his work here. I can't give him an F, although some would, and I'm almost want to give him a C, but I don't want to ruin that curve. And I'm going to put him now, and all these are possibly subject. Oh boy, but he's so much better than he's a lot better. Well, maybe he's kind of like a Wilson. So we're going to put him in the D camp for now. It could be a C, but we're going to leave him in D, and we'll adjust possibly before we do our super presidents rating, and then the greatest of all time. Let's move ahead on, and we're going to go with Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, one of the big things that he does, he stabilizes the nation after Nixon's troubles, and he really brings a chance for the nation to kind of heal up and get better. Some of the positive, one of the things that he does is very controversial. He pardons Nixon. He doesn't want, and again, this is it's politically based also, but also I think maybe partly to protect the integrity of the office. He brings about the Privacy Act with détente, the Helsinki Accords, which are another step in the direction of de-escalating tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, are brought into bear. He tries to get the huge money out of politics with campaign finance reform laws. It's not very effective. It does stem the tide, but this is still an issue today about the amount of big money that's in our politics. He's very bipartisan. He had to work with the Democrats because Republican brand was so bad. So he does work well with the Democrats. He unsuccessfully runs in 76. I think the country, I think he suffered not so much from his policies as he did from the branding and the stigmatization because of the Nixon presidency. He's not as effective as he can be because everyone does view him as a lame duck presidency, and the fact that the 76 election was actually reasonably competitive is a stand that he did do some things well. Not very effective, though. Not really a lot standing out there. A couple of good things and nothing that makes me go wow, and we're going to put him as a D president. It's interesting that we've had some really strong presidents in this group, and Kennedy easily could be an A, and now we've had a couple of weaker presidents with Johnson, Nixon, and Ford, and we're going to leave this off for now. We're going to come back and do Carter, Reagan, Bush, and probably Clinton next. So hope you like this video, and hope that you subscribe and watch some other of the past content and any upcoming content. Thank you, and have a great day.